Hello everybody and welcome to Basil. This is the first in a three-part session on container gardening that I'm doing. My name is Rich. I'm one of the Master Gardeners for the University of Illinois Master Gardener Program in Woodstock, and we're doing this in cooperation with the Crystal Lake Library. And we're going to talk a little bit today about containers and gardening in containers, and we're going to do it with herbs today, specifically the herb basil. So if we look at containers, the first one that I'm going to talk about is clay pots. And clay pots have been around for a long time. My Busha, that's Polish for grandmother, used to grow in container or clay pots all the time. They tend to dry out a little bit faster than plastic ones do, so you have to be careful that you don't let the plant get too dried out. On the other hand, there are plastic containers, and plastic containers hold on to moisture, and so then they can become waterlogged. They should have a hole in the bottom. Actually, that clay pot should probably also have a hole in the bottom of the pot. The third one is a ceramic pot, and you notice this one doesn't have a hole in the bottom, but it's got an internal liner for it that's plastic, and it does have holes in it. But you still have to be careful that you don't overwater, because the plastic container will hold on to that. We're actually going to use today a container that you might have around the house, and this is an old lettuce container that you would have bought at the store, lettuce, spinach, greens, and you're going to use that for the purposes of growing the basil today. One of the things we have to do is we probably should put some holes in the bottom of this one as well, and so I've already pre-done that, but I'll just show you. I'm using an awl and a hammer, and I would simply create a couple of holes in the bottom of this container. Make sure that you do it on a wooden block or on the ground or somewhere else, so that you're not damaging a very nice table when you go to do that. Then we're going to fill this with soil. Now the soil that I'm going to use today is a potting mix, and it is primarily like it's a potting soil that has, in this case, probably some peat mixed in with it. I always mix a little bit of compost in with mine. Provides a little bit of nutrient, but also a little bit of water holding value when I mix that in. So you're going to see me mix this in, put this about 3/4 of the way full. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to plant in here. Now we could plant seed in here just as nicely as we could put plants in here. We could put a half a dozen seeds in here, cover it with a plastic wrap, and make sure it was moist when we did that. And then we would go ahead and, once the seeds germinated, take the plastic wrap off. In this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to plant some basil that you either bought at the nursery or that you grew yourself. I grew these in some a community tray. And you notice that there's plenty of roots at the bottom here. We're going to actually break that apart. So yes, we'll probably damage just a little bit of root when we do that. I'm going to create a nice little space for this. Plant it in there so that the roots get pushed down, push some dirt around it. And I think I'm just going to put 4 of them in this container. That's about the right size for this. So we'll take 4 out, create a hole for each of these. Spread those roots out just a little bit when I do that. There's 2 more. And we'll grow 4 in here. They'll grow up pretty tall, as you'll see with the real plant, an extra plant that I have. Once I've pushed those 4 plants in, covered them up pretty nicely, I'll take some water and I'll go ahead and water the whole the container. If I have the holes at the bottom, then I've gone ahead and if I put too much in, it drains out. I would set this on a dish of some sort, or a plate or a tray, so that you don't, when you put it in the windowsill, because this will grow on a windowsill just fine. If you do that, you don't want to damage the windowsill. If you put it out on the deck, maybe a little different situation here. I would not put this out in the sun on day 1, simply because it's going to dry. Not that it's going to dry out, but it's a little bit of transplant shock. So maybe day 1 is in a cloudy area or shaded area, and then from then on it can be in the sun. I also have for you here a full basil plant. I just want to touch about that for just a second. This is a full basil plant. It's been growing here probably 3 or 4 months in my greenhouse. And one of the things you're going to notice here is that, in particular, this one has got some flower buds at the top. And I'm going to snip them off. And the reason behind cutting back the flower buds on a basil plant is that it tends to the flavor isn't quite as good when it's flowered. There's a lot of energy has gone into that flowering portion. So cut off the flowers. In fact, if you actually, I've got one that's cut off a little bit that had been cut off before, and you see that it's branched out. The dominance of the top, the tip, will then carry across into the lower branches. It'll branch out. Some of the lower leaves should be picked off early so that they don't discolor, because they'll discolor from the bottom up. But if you pick off a bigger leaf to use, then this is a sweet basil genovese, and it's got a really nice flavor for cooking purposes or for a caprese salad or something else. If you dry that, and you can, if you dry the herbs, then again you'd use a little bit less herb dry than fresh because of the concentration. Last one I want to just chat about for just a second. We mostly basil, but this is a rosemary plant, and rosemary is something that cannot be grown out through the winter. And the basil is an annual. It goes through about a year cycle, and maybe even a little less than it's done. This is about a 4-year-old rosemary plant. It's been cut back a couple of times. It gets pretty woody on the stem, but it can be kept for several years. It can be grown inside, and then you can snip off a piece of the rosemary and use that just like you would any other rosemary, or you can dry that out. And so what we've done here today is basil, basil, basil. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up in the near future when we'll talk about flowers, flowers, flowers.